My name is Spencer Gay. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Spencer.
This is never easy for me to do. I don't get asked to do it a lot. I know that's the cliche. You don't usually get asked anywhere when you're an alcoholic, but I do appreciate the opportunity. Every time I have to do this for like 5 minutes while the readings are going on, my alcoholism is at work, telling me how great of an opening I'm going to give you and the wonderful appeal that I'm going to bring, and then it immediately tells me that I'm a horrible person, I'm going to fail. So I have went through the steps in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which has helped me to tone that down. You know, that's basically what that's done for me, and even more so, I've been able to create a relationship with a power greater than myself that has solved not only my alcoholic problem, but many other problems. After getting sober, there are far more issues in my life that have to be addressed, and thanks to great sponsorship and my ability or my willingness to reach out and help other people, God has blessed me with a lot of things that I probably don't deserve. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to try to tell you what my life looked like, what happened, and what it's like now, but more so just try to paint a picture of how I've come to know God on a personal level. I got sober. Last time I drank was September 28th of 2016. I have a home group. Don't throw the book at me, but it's called the Spiritually Lit Group of Drug Addicts Anonymous, which uses this book. And but I am an alcoholic who got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and so I'm going to share that part of my story primarily. I was a crazy kid, grew up in Wilson County. My parents divorced. Used to try to use that excuse a lot. It was operable for many years. I still pull it out once in a while when it's of use to me. But I didn't have a bad childhood. I wasn't neglected. I didn't do without. I had most of what I wanted and everything that I needed. But I discovered alcohol at I would consider a young age, at 7, 8 years old. And it wasn't like this great experience until I was about 12. I was ironically on a church ski trip, and the chaperone bought us alcohol. I fancied myself a good negotiator, and I convinced him that we would be responsible and that he should understand, we don't often get away from our parents, and I was the spokesperson for the group. And what happened that night is I finally got intoxicated from alcohol. And I did a lot of crazy things that had only gone on in my head prior to that night, but I was comfortable doing it. There were things that I said, behaviors I exhibited that I had only thought of doing, but I became very comfortable with acting those things out when I was drinking. And I woke up the next morning feeling a lot of remorse and wondering what other people thought about how I behaved. And I blacked out that night. But it was everyone else passed out after like 3 beers, because we were like 12. And I drank the rest of theirs and stayed up, I think, all night basically. But I woke up feeling a bit of remorse, but there was a comfort in me that I knew I would do that again, because it was the greatest thing I'd ever experienced to date. And that continued until I was 40 years old. And so it wasn't a daily thing then. I hung around a group of people we were in private school. They were good people, had decent families, but the families were so busy. We would all go to someone's house that weekend and drink whatever liquor or beer was in the liquor cabinet and fill it up with water or tea. And that was just what it was through high school. It progressed. By the time I was 18, I was on alcohol daily. I was going to college. I was on other substances. And there was some unmanageability. There was no consequences to my behavior. The few times that I was caught or ran in with the law, my father paid my way out of it. That became a recurring thing for the next 20 years that I was kind of Teflon. Whatever. I thought I was untouchable because I would behave however I wanted to, and my daddy would bail me out. And I thought that was okay. I had a lot of pride in that. It wasn't till I was 40 years old and I went through the steps and somebody told me that was wrong. You know what I'm saying? And so I was very delusional by the time I got here. At 21 years old, I was committed to a detox. I did not stay sober in that detox, but I was made to go and stay there. And that became a recurring thing. Detoxes, probably 6 to 8 detoxes a year for the next 12 to 15 years. In these facilities, Alcoholics Anonymous would come in like we do now and bring a meeting. And my first interpretation of Alcoholics Anonymous was a guy that came in who told me he drank like I did, and I believed that he drank like I did. What I couldn't believe was that he didn't still drink, and I'm being honest about that. I thought that this guy was just a magnificent liar. I was really that sick. In talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, even in these rehabilitation centers, I thought that you went to Alcoholics Anonymous to learn how to drink right. I didn't know till I got out of one of them, like the 10th time I'd gone to detox, I actually followed up and went to a meeting. That's when I found out that you come here to not drink. And so I was very tied to alcohol and drinking. I thought that was just something you did. We have to figure out a way to do it so that it's not so detrimental to my life and other people. What ends up happening to me is I go in and out of these places based on selfishness. What can I get out of it? I'm going to get my mother off my back, or I'm going just to get enough grace so they can rent me an apartment. Or, I'll go, my dad will make deals with me. Go there and I'll get you a car. Go get straight and I'll do this for you. So it was always conditional. There was no hopelessness in my life because of the enabling that my parents gave me. And that's not their fault. I took advantage of it. But as I'd go in and out, they do the outpatient stuff. I did that. I learned a lot about how sick I was psychologically. And eventually, at 30 years old, like 10 years after I'd been exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous, I got out. I got into the halfway house. I went to the meeting, the first meeting that I could find, and I stood up and I told them, I'm an alcoholic. I didn't know what that meant, though. Everybody else was saying it, so I figured I should say it. And then my life was unmanageable, clearly. And I thought, if I just say I'm an alcoholic, these people will help me in some capacity. And that wasn't great. But I got a sponsor, and he tried to describe to me what alcoholism was, and I'll try to tell you briefly what it is and then some experience with how I've experienced that. I can't control the amount of alcohol once I start. That's what they taught me, that the first sign of I might have a problem. And by the time it progresses to the point where I know there's a problem and I want to stop, I don't have the power to stop. And my mind tricks me into drinking when it makes no sense at all. It makes sense out of taking the first drink when it makes no sense at all. And so I could relate. I had a tremendous amount of experience with that. There's so many stories, and I'm going to qualify, but there's just so many stories. One thing they taught me when I was 30 years old, I met with this sponsor every other day. He was a great sponsor. My attitude was horrible. I was very self-centered. It wasn't therapeutic. It was, I got a bunch of knowledge about Alcoholics Anonymous and alcoholism. And I drank again after that. But what I learned was once I put it in my body, I have this craving that supersedes everything. My example in life for you with that is I'm driving down the road one night, drinking, obviously. And the blue lights come on. They pull me over. They take me to jail. My lawyer had already educated me to never blow. We'll get your license back. Just don't blow, right? Well, it's like 11:30 at night. Beer store closes at 2, and I'm drinking. And it's like 1 o'clock, and I've refused to blow. Can't get the lawyer on the damn phone. So I'm like, the beer store's going to close. I need a beer. You know, I gotta get the hell out of here. And so what I do is I blow and give up my license for 8 years to get to the beer store at 2 o'clock. That's making the supreme sacrifice for a drink. True story. I didn't make it to the store by 2 o'clock. I got out of there about 1:30, but I had to walk. But I made it to the liquor house. I knew where I had a backup. So that's how I describe to the people that I've sponsored, but basically the phenomenon of craving if they can't comprehend it. And I ask guys to kind of give me a story that's similar to that so they can relate if that's in fact their situation. Another story that corresponds with this obsession that it talks about to control and enjoy my drinking. I had learned about this at 30 years old when this guy sponsored me. I understood that the only way I enjoy drinking is uncontrollably. I can't do both. I can't control the amount and enjoy it. So I tell people, if you put me in a rubber room, which they've done, I would, and you brought me one beer every hour, if I drank that beer, I would spend 55 minutes in misery waiting for the next one because you're controlling the amount in which I can consume it. And so what happened to me, true story, I broke my back. I ran off a ditch embankment drinking, of course, and I had to crawl out of the cornfield with a broke back. That was a bad night. The only thing that was good about that night was the pain medication. But they had me in traction, and I'm in the hospital in Greenville, North Carolina, and the doctor prescribed me one beer every 4 hours. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I had such a bad alcohol problem, I guess, and it was recorded. I'd been in like 50-some detoxes in Pitt County, the same detox. It was like once a month for 10 years. It was ridiculous. And so they knew me. They were like, this guy's crazy. We're going to need to give him some beer. I'm like, okay. And they gave me that one beer every 4 hours. But I was smarter than they were. I knew that I couldn't enjoy it if I drank one every 4 hours. So I stashed them till I had a full case. I had 24 so I could get good and drunk. And that's what I did. So that's what I use my education about alcoholism for. Is to understand I can't control enjoyment, so I better stock up before I start. Anyway, so that's really sad. It's humorous in hindsight, but that's pretty sad that I have to even stand up here and tell you that. But the truth of the matter is, it took all those things, and it took me. There was still a tremendous amount of delusion. September 28th, 2016. But after I left that hospital in that circumstance, I drank pretty much. I lost a friend who hung himself over this disease, my best friend. I blamed myself, and I basically resigned that I was going to die this way. I stayed sober 6 months at 30 years old. The goose hung high, like Bill says. Everything was good. And just one day, man, it just didn't make no sense no more to not drink that day. And I can't even tell you what happened. Mental blank spots. I got 4 or 5 different stories where everything's good. I'm sitting under the carport after work, and I'll stand up and walk to the corner store and go straight to the beer cooler and open and drink that beer before I even realize what I'm doing. So it's possible. It has been in my life. But what happens is I go to a very dark place. By this time, no one, even my family, can house me because I can't be trusted. I stole everything. One time I went to my mother's house while they were on vacation and stole every electronic and sold it. Not proud of that, but that's what I did. And many stories like that of me taking advantage of other people's kindness. And so I've pushed everything away. I've pushed every good thing in my life, even bad thing in my life is gone. The only thing I'm left with is a hotel room, which I owe money on, and a bottle of liquor. And countless nights and mornings waking up remorseful, confused, scared, sheer will and determination carrying me through DTs, hallucinations, alone, bright outside but dark in that room. Scared to walk outside, but I know I got to get out of there to get something. Scared of the people that I've hurt who want to hurt me. Moving to different cities just to get away from that fear. Incomprehensible demoralization. Facing something that I've exhausted all resources trying to solve. And I wake up that morning, no different than any other morning. This is not the day I got sober. It's probably about 6 months before I got sober. And I look up and I say, what the F do you want from me? Because I really have wanted to die. I have drank enough and done enough of other substances to have expired easily. There were periods of 24 to 48 hours of unconsciousness, lost time. And I'm ready to die is where I'm at. And I wake up again, angry that I woke up. And I've done that 100 times. And I'm like, what do you want from me? And the phone rings. My mother, who has not spoken to me in over a year, who has prayed for me countless hours and days, said that I just had the feeling I needed to call you. And I said, okay. I couldn't see anything spiritual in that at that time. Looking back, I know the power of God at work in that moment. But she had refused to do anything for me. And I had tried to get her to, and she called right after I said that prayer. And it turned out she came to get me. She took me to a detox. I had been on maintenance medication for alcoholism and drug abuse for 20 years. And so I went to this facility that was helping me with that. And I tried to get off it, and I did to a degree, but I ended up screwing that up. And somehow I ended up in Fayetteville, which was the last major city in North Carolina that I hadn't screwed somebody over that wanted to kill me, basically. And I went to Wade, I think it was, and stayed with my cousin. He had gotten sober. He had been in prison like myself. He had tried to get sober and failed, and he had finally made a beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous. So he tried to help me. That was horrible. At that time I had drank every day and for probably 4 weeks, like every day nonstop. And I went there and refused to go back to another detox. I found out later my mother sent me, once I was sober for 2 years, she sent me an envelope with every place that I'd ever been. She had documented. I'd been in 81 detoxes. And I had been in over 25 different rehabs, some of them 3 or 4 times. I'd been to prison twice and been locked up over 40 times in jails. And at that point I was fed up. I said, look, I'm just going to stop if it kills me. You know, I was just fierce will and determination. I'm going to stop. And I stopped. I ended up in the hospital 3 times over the next 3 weeks, coming off of whatever it was I was on. It's my experience that maintenance medications they give people, that they gave me, don't work. They weren't therapeutic for me, because if it feels good, I want more of it, and I'm going to become dependent on it. So I do the same thing with people. You know, I mean, if I like you, I want to hang out with you more, because I'm just that codependent. So I got off them. I did. It was very tough. I don't suggest it. I would suggest getting professional help if you're, taking something. I'm not a doctor, by the way. But I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express. But the point that I'm making is I put myself through hell fighting it, that I didn't have to. And it didn't even work. I ended up out of Wade in Fayetteville at a halfway house, which I had done 50 times before, and at a clubhouse in Fayetteville. It's called Sandalwood. I'd go up there every morning. They had free coffee. Why wouldn't you go? And then they were kind of like a staffing agency, because you could sit there and people that had jobs would come by and pick you up, take you to work. And they'd give you the money at the end of the day. And then you could get drunk and hide it from the guy who's in charge of the halfway house. It was a good deal in my mind. And so I'd stay sober for a month, fall off. I'd stay sober for 3 months. I went home for Thanksgiving. Oh, I'm sober. I'm going home. I'm going to make amends. I'm going to, be the prodigal son. Drunk that day. My motives were horrible. They were based on my ego. They were based on things like, look at me. And it wasn't till about 1.5 years of that in and out thing I was doing that I actually came in contact with what I consider a true member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not trying to be judgmental of those other folks. I think they were doing the best they could. But I needed a certain type of truth that was direct, not watered down, that wouldn't, I needed to find somebody I couldn't manipulate. It's really what, and I hadn't ran into anybody like that. Like I told you, I fancied myself from the first time I convinced that guy to buy us alcohol. That I'm a salesman. And I met this guy, and there was something about him. I didn't even have to talk to him. I knew that he was walking this thing that I'd been reading about that happened in the 30s. And I asked him to be my sponsor. I've changed sponsors. And this is when I knew this guy could help me. I sat down with him this time, and I was telling him about all my problems, right? Because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. That's what everybody else had been doing in that clubhouse. We'd go in there, and everybody would bring their problem of the day for that meeting, and then the other person after them would tell them how to fix their problem. And so I thought that this was a more individual counseling session where I could tell him my problem and he would solve it. And he looked at me one time, and I don't know if it's first or second time, but one time he looked at me and said, "You might have to drink again before you're willing to do what's necessary." I said, "Damn, you telling me to drink again?" That sounded good to me, because I wasn't very happy about how I was living and wasn't very comfortable. And a drink sounded like a good thing. I didn't tell him that. I said, "You're crazy," But I was entertaining it. But that, in fact, is what had to happen again. And I went out for about 2 weeks and ended up in another one of them hotel rooms. And I made a phone call. This time I went to detox on my sobriety date. And what happened was, I met with that guy the day that I got out. Y'all gonna have to forgive me, I can't stand him.
No, yeah, a little bit.
And so what happens, I met with this guy, and I'm about to tell you what he asked me to do. And it was more like a told me to do, but it was a suggestion, but it was strongly suggested. And I'm going to tell you what I did. I met with him the day I got out of detox, and he said, "There's only one way I'll continue to help you." He said, "I'm going to give you a list of shit to do, and you're going to either do it or you're going to get drunk again." And I said, "Okay." And here's what I did. Every day for 2 years I did this. I had to wake up and pray before I went to the bathroom. Then I would go out and smoke, which is what I did every morning, and I would read a meditation. I would sit 5 minutes. Couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand sitting still. But I tried, because I really want to stay sober. And after that 5 minutes, I would call him and tell him what I read about. And then I would call 2 other alcoholics before lunch. Go to work, get off, have some commitment to pick someone up, or at the halfway house that we were at, get people to a meeting, because I had a vehicle somehow. I had procured a damn vehicle somehow. And it was, I don't know how well qualified it is as a vehicle, but it got down the road. And then I would go do that, and we'd go to the meeting, get there early, like 30 to 45 minutes. Even if it's not your home group, you get there early. You help them set up. You clean up. You shake the hand of somebody you don't know. You get their phone number, and you actually call them the next day. After the meeting, you stay. I had to stay to the last person, help them break down the tables, whatever I had to do to be a part of Alcoholics Anonymous. At night, I was to go home, open the book to page 86, answer the questions about when we retire at night, write down the answers to those questions as honestly as I could at that time. And then I was to call him and tell him I would try to explain to him how I got the answer. he started just he started just saying, read what you wrote down, because it would be like a 2-hour thing, because I had to build a case for why I felt that resentment. You know? And so I did that. Then I prayed and thanked God for keeping me sober that day. Usually my attitude was bad towards that whole process, and then I go to sleep. I did that every day for 2 years straight, didn't miss one beat. And that regimen is probably the primary reason I'm standing here sober today. That's what it took. That is what's prescribed in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Aside from that, I had to have a home group. I had to have a service commitment, which was going to detoxes. They were open at that time where you could get in them before the virus. Currently, we can't even get in the detox in Cumberland County. But I would go with him. He would go with us. And I would be like, why are we coming here? I just got out of here, you know? And he said, well, you're going to just tell these people you just got out of here. All you got to do is share your experience. You came here last week and now you're sober still. And I said, well, that seems kind of condemning. I don't want to go tell people what's wrong with me, but my ego accommodated. You know, I started to feel like I belonged to something, and I was pretty proud that I'd stayed sober 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever the case was. But what we would do is we would go and tell a story to those people, and we would follow up with them on the day they got out. We would get their phone numbers. We would give them our phone number. And there's a few people sober as a result of that work. So I'm glad that I could be a part of doing that. After about 6 months, I kind of hit a crossroads. I had understood what alcoholism was. I believed that God could solve my problems before I even got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I believed that there was something there. What I wrestled with was the worthiness based on my behavior. Am I worthy of this love that is necessary to free me from this bondage I'm in? I wrestle with that today. And so at 6 months sober, I really thought this whole time I was doing these things, it was all in vain. I don't know how I stayed sober 6 months. I was convinced that tomorrow I'm drunk, because that had been my history for 25 years. I couldn't stay sober more than 3 to 6 months. So why would I believe this is going to work any different? Just because I'm able to check a list of things off? And I was right. Those things are great that I was doing. They're a good way to, train yourself to be accountable and actually deal with things. But what I was faced was with a third step question in my life at 6 months sober. Like, am I still doing this on my own power? Or is there a God in my life that I'm aware of? Let's put it that way. I believe there was a God in my life. How conscious am I of that? So I met him at a McDonald's, and I was crying. 6 months sober, I got a new job. I had a new truck. I mean, everything outside looked pretty good. I could hold my head up high based on stuff. But inside, I was just as broken as the day I walked in the door. And I knew that. And now I couldn't be honest with any of y'all, but I could tell him the truth. That has been an underlying principle that's an important basis of staying sober, being entirely honest with someone. And so the truth was I was still running on my own power. I hadn't given up anything. And he told me to go to the church down the road and meet God. And decide whether or not I was going to give my life to him or I still wanted to run the show. And I did, physically. And I don't know anybody. I hope there are people that do not wrestle with that daily, whether they're in charge or God's solely in charge. It's a great ideal to achieve. I'm still working on it. But I made a conscious commitment to find something more personal in my life as far as spirituality. I had grown up in a Pentecostal church, convinced I was going to hell by the time I was 6 or 7 years old, just for the thoughts in my head alone. And so that belief system was there. What happened to me is I realized that there can be a much broader highway to the narrow path that is Christianity. And I'm not preaching, I'm just saying that that's what I practice. But I needed a broad net because I wasn't getting into a little narrow path. And circumstances provided that. The current church I'm a part of. And that's just a series of consequences that happened. And I was able to get and stay sober that first year. I was able to make amends to my father, who died when I was 3 months sober to the day. I was shown the love of Alcoholics Anonymous by my sponsor during that period of time. December 2nd, my sponsor's birthday, which I had no idea at the time, he picked me up. He called me and said, "We're going to a meeting in Rocky Mount," which was up where I was from. I got in the car and he said, I won't do this again, but I kind of lied to you because I'm not sure, I wasn't sure how you take it, but something's wrong with your father. So he drove me up there and sat up there to the middle of the night while my dad told me he was going to die. And I had always held that reservation. He was my hero. Everybody would understand if I got drunk when my dad died. And he died 26 days later on the 28th of December 2016. And at the funeral, my sponsor, his wife, some of his family showed up, and he sat with me, with my family. And I didn't know what to think about it. I really couldn't understand how somebody that looked like they had it all together would waste their time on me. You know what I'm saying? And I needed that type of love. And I found that I have that exact same type of love in my heart for other people as a result of somebody showing me that. I got employed. It's kind of humorous, but I was scared to death if I told a lie that it would trick me into drinking again. Does that make any sense? Because I was just convinced that there was something going on unconsciously in my head that had a plan to get me back to a drink. And I'm convinced today that's still true. But, so I went to get a job. I don't know if I was 3 or 4 months sober. My dad had passed away. I finally had to grow up. It was a very liberating experience. I'm not saying that it should be, but it was just like I had depended on my father for so long. And I had started a relationship with my heavenly Father, so to speak. And now this was gone, and this is all I've got, so I better nurture it type. That's what really kind of happened. And this honesty thing was just huge to me. Like, I would be blatantly honest and like tell you were ugly. You know, I mean, I'm just, because if I lied to you, I might get drunk. You know, how do these look, hon? Horrible. And so, don't do that. And so what happened, I went to the job interview. I called him before I went, called my sponsor. And I said, man, I'm going to job interview. What am I supposed to tell them? If they ask me, like, do you have a history of substance abuse or whatever, if they ask you that, are you supposed to tell them? Because like before, 3 months prior to that, I know what I would have told them. I would have told them everything's fine. Yeah, you got the greatest guy in the world sitting in front of him. And he said, why don't you tell him the truth? I said, okay. So I went in there before they even asked. I said, look, I'm a drug addict, I'm an alcoholic. I've been homeless. I've taken advantage of almost every relationship I've ever been in. I am one heck of a carpenter and contractor. And I'm trying to turn my life around. But I'm not going to come in here and lie to you. And I was like, okay, this is over. I'm going to walk out. And they said, that's interesting. You know, I saw later maybe I didn't have to go with full disclosure, but that's what they got. Because if I lied to them and got the job, I'd be drunk in 2 weeks, and then I'd lose the job anyway. You know. So what happened is they respected that, and it was an experience where I could go in, tell the truth, and allow God to do His job with the results. And my sponsors constantly told me that I'm out of the results business. I take the action, the results are left up to God. And they hired me. And within 6 months, I went from being a salesperson to the sales manager to the operations manager and third in command at a home improvement company. I mean, they weren't nothing spectacular, but it was hard to keep my ego at bay when they kept promoting me. And all I did there, man, is I told the truth to the customers, to them. I admitted my fault immediately, all out of the fear of drinking. And this is where I learned that. I showed up early for work, just like I showed up early for the meetings. I helped clean up before I went home, just like I did at the meetings. Everything that I do in my life, I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything that's productive. So, a couple of years had passed. I had left women alone completely for over a year. I got into a relationship right like 366 days. And that didn't work out well. After about a 4-week period, that had bailed. And I had such great intentions. I wasn't really heartbroken at this point, but I was like, you know, I'm just going to be alone the rest of my life. I talked to my sponsor about it, and he said, you'll be fine, which is what he always said. And he was right. But the work I had done in the 4th and 5th step and the continued inventory where relationships are concerned and sex, I was tired. I knew that my idea of what that's supposed to be was wrong. And so I revisited my ideal that I wrote in the step work, and I genuinely prayed to God and kind of surrendered what I thought my love life was supposed to be. And it wasn't long after that, a girl who had gotten sober around the same time in the same community, she and I, you know, started talking, and I don't move slow with any deal. So I was married to her within 8 months. And, you know, I see what I want and I go after it, I guess. But we counseled, you know, we had a big wedding basically with everybody that was in it was in recovery. It was a beautiful thing to me. It's been a gift from God. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that I was wrong about my idea of what marriage is supposed to be. It seems like I'm wrong about everything. And so I continue to be sponsored and have spiritual mentors to help me. My marriage has not always been great, but it's been, I've learned a lot about myself, and I've learned a lot of patience, and I've learned what the power of loving another human being can actually do to change me, or at least create the willingness to change. Some of the, never got enough time. Some of the things, I made amends with the IRS, I made amends with my father, I made amends with my mother. I've been able to give to her, I guess the last thing I can tell you, I was blessed with my wife. She's wonderful, and we both go to that home group. We both sponsor men and women, and that's been something that has ebbed and flowed. My ability to effectively sponsor men. It is great when I do well at it. Unfortunately, I get myself into situations where I'm deeply distracted. I ended up somehow getting my contractor's license as a result of my sponsor believing I could do it. I didn't think I could. But he had believed all these other things that worked out, so I tried. I took the action. That happened. We started a company. We've employed some people. We've, served the community, building stuff, and that has been a great experience. It's also created fear, which in turn creates a stronger need for a relationship with God. And all those things go hand in hand in, my spiritual progress. I still say that I'm not the greatest example of Alcoholics Anonymous. I promise you. But I am a great example of what Alcoholics Anonymous can do. And with that, I'm going to read just something we read at our home group, and then I'll let you go. On page 25 of the big book, it says, "There is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed." Thank you.